Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. We are at that point of the year where it is football on the brain, and it's an exciting time. Starting to think more and more, starting to plan more content, starting to the brain is just, the wheels are turning with football content, football ideas, and so excited about that. So appreciate everybody for tuning in to the Utah Blockcast. Had a good weekend this weekend, just on that same subject, just talking ball, talking through a number of different things with ball. We're all starting to get that itch for college football, and man, it's just exciting. So on this episode, getting back behind the mic, going to do a little Utah football fall camp buy or sell. So there's a few topics that I want to talk about, want to run through, and whether I buy them, whether I sell, a few narratives maybe out there that I'll talk about as well. So that'll be the headliner of the episode, the little buy or sell segment. Also need to talk about Utah's final 2025 addition to the roster, maybe question mark. But over the weekend there was a little signing for the 2025 class, which, given where we're at in the year, it being August, was kind of a pleasant surprise. So we'll talk about that. And first, Utah basketball. This hasn't been officially announced, but the Running Utes are set to take on another Pac-12 foe this season. Former Pac-12 foe, I should say. They will be taking on the Washington Huskies in Seattle. A little scheduling news for the Running Utes. And they'll be up in Washington December 29th. That has not been made official by Utah, but it has been made official by the Washington Huskies. You can go to that to their schedule, their 2025-26 schedule. You can see the date there. So Utah will be up in Seattle in late December this year, which that's a nice game to add to the schedule. And so Utah has one more game that they have to finalize in their non-conference schedule slate to complete it before, and that'll happen before they announce and release their 2025-2026 schedule in full. But that's sort of their mindset, their approach to this is they're going to finalize the entire schedule before releasing any sort of updates. So that's why we haven't seen anything on the scheduling front with Utah basketball, but progress is being made. Again, they just added the Washington Huskies. That was something that I think was in the works for a little while and was finalized sometime last week. So that's been added to the schedule. Again, December 29th, they'll be up in Seattle to take on the Huskies. The Huskies will return to Salt Lake City in 2026 for a nice little home matchup there between former Pac-12 foes. So that's a good one to add there. But let's get into Utah's latest addition to the 2025 roster. All right, so with Josiah Jefferson, obviously signed August 2nd. That's a big deal for Utah. Obviously, you add another player to this year's roster. That's always a big deal. That's an exciting thing. There should be, excitement around that. But it's going to be important to keep expectations in check with Jefferson. Sounds like he's not going to be able to get here until the end of August, at the earliest. So, he's going to be behind the eight ball a little bit in that sense, in terms of getting acclimated to not only this level of ball, but also the offense and all of those sort of things. So he's going to have some catching up to do once he gets here. And that's going to be, just important to keep in mind. He is a talent, and there's reason to be excited that he's joining the roster this season. But I think this year, more likely than not, will end up being a redshirt year for Jefferson. Now, with that, he does have his redshirt year, but he also has 3 seasons of eligibility. So he's a 4 to play 3, which is good. And I think bringing him in now, you want these guys in the building as early as you can get them, essentially, right? You want these guys in the building within, learning the culture, getting acclimated to the culture, getting acclimated to the process. You want these guys in the building, learning from these coaches, learning from their teammates, all of that sort of stuff. That's what you want. You want them here first and foremost. And that's exciting that Utah's going to be able to have him in the program this season. But again, with him just not getting here until the end of August, that's going to put him behind a little bit. So let's keep expectations in check with Jefferson this season. There is talent here. There is a lot to work with Jefferson. And when you look at his recruiting profile, obviously, a mid 3-star guy, rated an 87 according to 24/7 Sports, which is a solid grade for him. 6'4", 230 pounds, playing his first year of college football at the JUCO level last year at Southwestern College, and kind of didn't put up gaudy numbers, but when you watch the tape, it's easy to see why, the programs that got involved with him like they did, it's easy to see why they would, be interested in him. So obviously he's got 8 offers with programs like Utah, Oklahoma, Arizona, Cal, Boise State, those types of programs involved with him. I think he had Maryland in the mix as well. But this came down to, if you remember going back to June when he committed, this came down to Utah, Oklahoma, and Arizona. And I think Utah surprised by landing his commitment. Obviously, you could still see the crystal ball prediction from our good friend there, Jason Shear, of the Arizona side at 24/7 Sports. And I think that was sort of the expectation. If you don't know Josiah Jefferson, he's related to Tony Jefferson, who is an Oklahoma alum and a 9-year NFL vet as a safety. And so that was sort of the anticipation, was that he'd end up committing to Oklahoma, but Utah was able to secure that commitment to win him over. And I think it makes a lot of sense for Jefferson when you look at what Utah has done at that tight end specifically over the last couple of years. There's a couple guys that sort of speak to Jefferson and who he is as a prospect. Jefferson, if this sounds familiar, former basketball player, converted to football very recently. And you look at what Utah did last year with Caleb Lohner, Dalton Kincaid, obviously, with his story, playing basketball all throughout high school, not really playing football until senior year, going to San Diego as a non-scholarship program, then coming to Utah, blowing up. So there is a track record here of Utah working with these types of athletes, and that, I think, spoke to Jefferson in terms of his own personal development. And so I think that was the message to Jefferson in landing his commitment and being able to beat out Oklahoma. And so you're excited to add that to the mix. And when, you look at what Jefferson, has done in terms of his on-field ability, you can watch the film here. The big thing that stands out is, obviously, you like the combination of size and athleticism. He's able to get vertical, and you see the natural ball skills, right? And that sort of speaks to his basketball background, his ability to go up, high point passes, and all of that. But really like his movement and his ability to change directions. You can kind of see him snapping his head around there as on the out route. And then his ability to create after the catch. You're excited about that and what that can look like as he gets into this system. So there's definitely reason to be excited about Jefferson, but temper expectations for what it means this season specifically. I think there should be a lot of excitement about 2026 and beyond. Utah is fired up to have him in the program, and Utah fans should be as well. So, barring some sort of emergency, I think Utah is in really good shape at that tight end, actually, based on what I'm hearing from fall camp. And I think Utah's in good shape there. They've got depth, and this is going to really help Utah in 2026. So really like the addition of Jefferson. There's obviously tremendous potential, and him getting here whenever he does, that's when this process will begin for him in Utah. So lot to like here. Again, with of Jefferson and what he brings to the table in terms of his skill set. A lot to be excited about, but which that's kind of the situation we're in with, him coming from the JUCO ranks, not getting here till late. Again, just keep expectations in check with him. So let's talk buy or sell now. Let's get into this. I've got a few subjects that I want to get through here with Utah football. I'll just play some clips from camp here as I go through this. So buy or sell. I've got a few topics that I want to hit on. Some questions that I've seen or questions that have been, messaged to me, that sort of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I'm going to go through here. So buy or sell. Devon Dampier's acclamation, specifically his ability to throw the deep ball. How does that translate here? Am I buying or selling essentially Devon Dampier's deep ball? I really want to buy. I really want to buy. Looking at some of his numbers on attempts, 20 yards down the field or more, Dampier completed 35% of his throws on 20 plus yards. So that's 25 of 71 attempts, and a lot of which were actually him just airing it out to guys, not necessarily throwing it away, but throwing it in a place where, if anybody is going to get it, it's going to be his guy, nobody else. He had a number of those types of throws, which sort of deflated his completion percentage, but that is what it is. So he only threw one touchdown and 4 interceptions. So looking at those numbers, you're not jumping out of your seat to buy into this. However, looking at some of the deeper numbers, I think there's a lot to work with here. Of those 25 completions, 19 of which were considered big-time throws by Pro Football Focus. That is the third most. So those 19 big-time throws is the third most on deep attempts. Would have been the third most in the Big 12 last year. So obviously the volume plays into that with 71 attempts, but that's a pretty good number. Pretty good place to be. Top 4, top quarter of the Big 12, considering the quarterbacks and how well they threw the ball last year. So that's a good number. You like that. 19 big-time throws. And again, what is a big-time throw? Essentially, it's just one of those throws that you know it when you see it. It's just you throw it into a tight window. It's an extremely accurate throw, a really impressive throw. So that's what you are really encouraged by. I think more encouraging than that is actually the turnover-worthy throws. So, obviously I mentioned the 4 interceptions to one touchdown, and you're a little concerned about that, but Dampier only had a 4.6% turnover-worthy throw rate, which would have been the 4th lowest percentage in the Big 12 last year, behind only Shedeur Sanders, Sam Levitt, and Avery Johnson. So that's where I get really excited to buy. I think that speaks to Dampier's decision making, and I think it speaks to his willingness to protect the ball. Right, so he's going to make either a great throw or he's going to throw it where only his guy can get it. And even though it doesn't count as a throwaway where you're throwing it out of bounds, I think that speaks to his decision making. So, I think what's holding me back more so than anything with Dampier himself is obviously the pass catchers. And so that's going to be the big question mark for me, is who are going to be those guys that are going to be those vertical threats. That was the biggest concern for Coach Whittingham in spring ball in terms of what they wanted to address. I do feel they've added a couple pieces that help them with that, and I think there's reason to be optimistic. So, it's one of those things where you go to the store and you're dying, you're itching to buy it, but you just can't pull the trigger just yet. You want to read some of the reviews. It's something that just released, that sort of thing. So that's where I'm at with Dampier and his deep ball passing. There are some really encouraging things here, but I want to hear more about the pass catchers before I'm willing to really buy in on Dampier's ability. But in terms of just Dampier and his ability and sort of his decision making, I'll buy that. But in terms of what it means and what we're looking for in terms of the vertical passing game and finding success there, it's not just up to Dampier, it's up to the pass catchers as well. And so I'm going to hold off for now. but it is something that I'm itching to invest my money in for sure. The next subject here with buy or sell is concerns over the defensive line. And I am going to buy on the fact that there are concerns, and I buy into those concerns with the defensive line. I think it's concerning that Utah is going to rely on, a handful of freshmen to play, you know, to play roles on along the defensive line. I think, Utah it would have been great if Utah could have added a veteran body to sort of alleviate that concern, right? Having to rely on, these young pups. So I get that concern. Another thing that is, that sort of plays into the concerns along the defensive line is you had a grizzled veteran in Junior Tafuna, who was also the emotional leader, not only of that defensive tackle room, but of that defense in general, right? You could tell how much this game, how much this program means to Junior Tafuna. And when I look at this defensive tackle room, I was really encouraged by what I saw from Aliki Vamahi. He is a quiet person. He is, not the type to put himself out there like a junior did. But, he knows that he has to step up and be the sort of leader that, these young guys can go to and can kind of pick his brains and can learn from. But I'm not sure that he's going to be that emotional leader type. Can Dallas Vakalahi be that? Can somebody else be that? That's where, I'm concerned. So I think there is going to be leadership in this room. It's just going to come in a different form. And that may not necessarily be a bad thing either, but it is something that we've had over the last couple of years with Junior in that role and what he's meant to that room. So, and then the last thing is, this has been a question that I've seen quite a bit. Is this group big enough? And, you're kind of counting on some guys that have had to put on, a significant amount of weight. And though I've heard where their weight is at coming into fall camp, these guys are going to lose weight while they're working as hard as they do in this heat, man. It's just hard to maintain weight. So I do think, those concerns though, while it may sound kind of silly, I think there is something to it. You do need those big bodies. You do need those weight numbers up there. And Utah doesn't have those big numbers like we've seen in the past at that defensive tackle room. So I am buying on the concerns. I understand them and acknowledge them. However, I also think there are reasons to be optimistic. So can Utah really rely on a couple of freshmen? When you go back over the last couple of years, Utah has relied on a couple of true freshmen. You go back even years past, and you look at some of the others that have played bigger roles, and a couple of the Pututaus that were in the program all those years back. Hoati Pututau was one that played a couple hundred snaps as a freshman. And I say true freshman, but a couple of freshmen to play big roles in their first year with the program. Junior Tafuna himself, getting back from his mission. He was a 2019 graduate out of high school, out of Bingham. He went and served a mission. He came back 2021 and has a tremendous year that year, his first year with the program. And even last year, right? Dallas Vakalahi played 250 snaps and looked pretty darn good, as a true freshman, just 3 months off the mission. So yeah, I think Utah, this isn't completely foreign to them. And they understand that the formula, they understand what sort of standard they need to get these guys to. And I think there are a couple guys that I'm really bullish on in terms of what they can be in year one. That obviously being Carson Kafusi and Semi Tawalunga specifically. What can you get out of a Pupu Sepulona? What can you get out of a Dylan Battle and Sione Motuapuaka? We'll see. But I feel really good about what Utah has in Carson and what they have in Semi. And I think Carson specifically, I think, is going to be ready to go for a pretty solid role this year in year one as a true freshman. So, and then the leadership, again, Aliki is going to step up. I think he's going to be that sort of calming veteran presence. so it is going to take on a different form. But I'm curious to see, with Dallas Vakalahi and where he's willing to be, where he's willing to engage in terms of the role of leadership. Listening to him, when we interacted with him during spring ball, he's a very mature, very wise kid in terms of how he views the game, how he views life, how he views the program. And I think that sort of lends itself to thinking he can become kind of emerge as a leader for Utah in that room. So there's encouraging signs there. And then, again, with the weight, I do think there are a handful of guys that are bigger than their weights listed on the official roster. So we'll see. But I do buy the concerns, but there are also reasons to be optimistic about that group as well. So what's the next topic here? This was a question I got DM'd, and will there be more than 3.5 freshmen who make an impact? So over under 3.5 in terms of impact freshmen this season. I'm going to buy that there will be more than 3.5 freshmen, impact freshmen this season for Utah. I'm going to buy that. Again, I'm talking about, a couple in Carson Kaufusi and Semi Taulunga. So I'm going to put some qualifiers here in terms of what I deem an impact freshman. And as I get the video restarted on YouTube. So here's what I'm going to qualify as an impact freshman. So at running back, I went back and sort of looked at rushing attempts for true freshmen. Ty Jordan, I think, had 85. Zach Moss had 83. And then a couple other freshmen got reps where it's like 20, 30. So I'm going to put the bar at 60 touches, whether it be rushing attempts or rushing and receiving, 60 touches for running backs. That's going to be the bar that I set it at. I'm going to put, in terms of receptions for receivers and tight ends, Utah's had, success with freshman receivers in years past. We all remember Britton Covey, all the way back in 2015. That was 10 years ago. Britton Covey was a freshman 10 years ago. That is wild. I don't know. I was looking up those numbers, and that sunk in and sort of hurt in a way. We're getting old, people. Jeez. But Covey, his freshman year in 2015 had 43 receptions. So a pretty productive year from him. I don't know if you guys remember this, but Jalen Dixon in 2016, he had 32 receptions and was second on the team, I think, with, over 400 yards. Jalen Dixon had 32 receptions in 2018. Brant Keithy, who was also a freshman that year, had 20 receptions. So I'm sort of looking at, other freshmen that have caught passes, and whether it be tight end or receiver. I'm going to put the bar at 25 receptions for a receiver or tight end in terms of what I'm deeming an impact freshman. And then with all the other positions, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, safety, production can be kind of difficult to gauge with those positions. But I think I'm going to put the qualifier on all other positions as 200 snaps. And then obviously you have your kicker, who we may see Dylan Curtis be that guy this year. We'll see. But all other positions, I'm just going to say playing 200 snaps. If you can play 200 snaps, I think that qualifies as an impact freshman. So I'm going to buy that there are going to be more than 3.5 freshmen who make an impact this year. And I think, there's a couple guys that come to mind. Obviously, like I said, I already mentioned the defensive tackles, Carson Kaufusi, Semi Taulunga. I think those guys can definitely be, two that play over 200 snaps this year. I think Nathan Tillman is going to be interesting to keep an eye on this year. Really like his game and how it fits within that safety room. Obviously, Utah's got depth ahead of him, and they feel really good about the depth that they have there with Teo and Ravid and Jackson and Nate. They feel really good, but I like Nate's projection and sort of the initial impression that he's made in that safety room. And then offensively, I don't think there's going to be any freshmen that make an impact along the offensive line, just given the fact that Utah's depth there is so strong. But at pass catcher and running back, I think there are a few guys that could potentially, make a pretty sizable impact this year. Starting with running back Daniel Bray, who was here for spring ball. He was a guy that every time we were up there watching practice, he found a way to make an impact. Whether it be, taking a handoff, bouncing it outside, using his speed to get to the edge and getting down the sideline, whether it be, catching a screen pass, whether it be, getting vertical as a running back or as a slot receiver. He is a versatile athlete that I think, Utah will figure out ways to utilize this year. So he's going to be a guy that I think can potentially get to that 60 touches mark this year. Again, I think Utah is going to be a really heavy volume in terms of the run game, and I think a number of guys are going to be involved. But I think Bray, altogether, I think he has the potential to get to 60 touches this year. Again, going back to Ty Jordan in 2020 with 83 carries, I believe. Zach Moss in 2016 is probably more applicable to somebody like Bray, where there are going to be guys ahead of him. Jordan sort of emerged as the best running back in that group. I'm not sure Bray has that potential, but I think Moss in 2016 is somebody that Bray sort of, is similar to, in the sense that, there was Joe Williams, there was Armand Shine, and he had to compete for opportunities, still ended up with over 80 carries. Can Bray be that, where maybe he doesn't have the game or two where he's getting 15 to 20 carries, but, over the course of, 12 games, he's getting 5 to 6 touches a game? I think he can be that. I think he can do that. So we'll see. So Bray's somebody that I think can get to that. In terms of the pass catchers, Mana Carvalho, I think, is going to be somebody that should be on the radar in terms of getting to 25 receptions. I think there's a lot of, easy buttons where you can get that sort of production pretty easily for him, and he's great with the ball in his hands, creating after the catch. So I think he's somebody that I think can make an impact there. And then, JJ Buchanan coming in, and there was a lot of optimism about what he can add to the receiver or tight end room, and he's sort of settled in and at that tight end position. And I think he can be somebody that Devon Dampier looks to utilize this year as well, where he can get to that, 15, 20, 25 reception mark. I think that's certainly within his range in terms of his ability to make an impact this season. And then, there's always going to be that surprise contributor, right? It could be a linebacker, Cyrus Polu or Christian Thatcher. I think there are always those guys. Utah has had those guys throughout the years, right? I think the biggest surprise, going back to last year, was obviously Dallas Vakalahi. Again, just 3 months off the mission, coming in, making, not just playing 250 snaps, but those were really productive snaps. He was productive, made an impact. And so, you go back years before, Cole Bishop as a true freshman in 21, right? He was a mid 3-star safety coming out of Georgia, was previously committed to Duke. Expectations weren't really high for him, but he came in and, man, he just made an impact. Sione Vaki in 2022, right? Working his way into the defensive lineup in that nickel position before he became, a safety, a big-time safety the next year in 23. So, there's always going to be those freshmen that sort of come out of nowhere, and I think there's definitely room for that as well. But I do think there's enough here where, over 3.5 impact freshmen, I'm going to buy on that. Yeah, I'm going to buy on that. And then the last thing here, do you buy or sell? Utah has learned lessons from the 2024 season, and I'm going to buy. I'm going to buy in the sense that I think we've seen a focus shift in terms of the offense, right? Kyle Whittingham made it a point of emphasis that, you need an offense that is transfer friendly. These guys coming in summer, they have to be able to pick up the offense in a quick manner. So I do think that was a lesson learned last year, and making the transition to Jason Beck, I think it makes it more doable for somebody like Tobias Merriweather or Larry Simmons, who joined the program this summer, to come in and make an impact right away. So I think that was a lesson learned last year. I think workload management injury prevention. Again, given the injury history last year and the year before that, I do think Utah's made some adjustments. Obviously, their practice schedule this year is something that I previously highlighted as an adjustment that they've made to sort of help with the workload and players' recovery timelines. So they're giving players more space in between practices, in between physical periods, to sort of recover and that sort of stuff. We'll see what that looks like as we get into the season. But I think they've continued to look at different ways to still work on the fundamental principles of football: physicality, tackling, blocking, that sort of stuff, while also giving them the rest and recuperation that they need in order to maintain their health. So I think that was another lesson learned. A couple other lessons I think they learned: running back depth and optionality. I think that you look at the depth chart this year compared to last, and things sort of went awry last year with a couple guys who sort of just sort of lost their standing within the running back room, Jalen Glover, Mike Mitchell. And so, depth was unfortunately eliminated last season. And I think there was a major point of emphasis in ensuring that there was enough depth at the position to maintain a level of play in the event of injury, but then also, having options and, providing different looks, having different running backs, being able to do different things. I think Utah got bogged down to, a couple of running backs that just, Mekhi Bernard was tremendous, gave everything to the program, was able to do quite a bit of everything, but he couldn't, he ran tough, but he couldn't be that physical, line mover essentially that, somebody before him was able to do. I think having different looks, having variety, having optionality is another lesson that Utah learned last year. All right, so that was the buy or sell segment. That'll do it for me on that. If you have topics, questions, suggestions in terms of what you want to hear, what you want to discuss, that sort of stuff, please feel free to hit me up. You guys know where to find me. Twitter, Blue Sky, wherever, Instagram, whatever. You guys can send your topics, send your questions, whatever you've got. Would love to keep that going, a little buy or sell segment, and keep that going. But looking forward to this week. We'll be back up on the hill on Wednesday to talk to Coach Whittingham and the offensive side of the ball. So we'll talk to players then. And then on Thursday, we'll be back up there to talk to the defensive players. So that'll do it for us in terms of our media availability. Utah football is going to be, conducting, they're going to have their first scrimmage of 2 this camp. So that'll be a big moment in fall camp. I think Utah, maybe not so much the public, but Utah's going to gain quite a bit of clarity, I think, with position group battles, with spots on the depth chart. That's going to be the big thing for Utah this week. This is sort of the week you make your move, right? So I think that scrimmage will be key to that. And, we won't be able to watch. We won't be up there, but, we'll certainly see what we learn from this week's scrimmage, if we learn anything at all. So that's what we're looking forward to this week. Again, appreciate everybody for tuning in. I think Wednesday I'm going to do another live stream, on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'll make sure to share it to the other social platforms as well to make sure we get even more interaction with that. So look forward to that. And then again, another episode later this week on Friday. So, man, we're getting close to it. Season is closing in. We're ramping up the coverage here at the Utah Blockcast, which is just myself right now. We'll get Cam Tyson. We'll get those guys back. We'll have some other things got some other things in the works as well, and excited for that. But yeah, that's what we're looking forward to this week. So for myself, for the Utah Blockcast, that'll do it for me. Signing off.